YouTube, and welcome to another Doctor Who Big Finish review. Today I'm taking a look at one of the most recent releases on the Big Finish website, and that is the Labyrinth of Buda Castle. Now this episode is actually one of the current run with the 4th Doctor in the Series 5 line, and I've not seen any of these before, which is quite interesting because I've never actually listened to any complete 4th Doctor story, which once again this series of reviews tends to be quite a first for me at the moment, which I'm guessing will sort of get toned down over time as I get introduced to more and more Big Finish. But yeah, this episode is actually quite a first for me, and it's an interesting one. The Labyrinth of Buda Castle is written by Eddie Robson, and this episode, by cover alone, you can guess it is quite a gothic horror style of story. That's what it reminds me of anyway. For some reason I was actually quite intrigued from the story from the very start before I even pressed play, and I think it's down to the cover and things because it does generally look quite a spooky story. Didn't know anything about the setting or anything like that. I didn't even read the biography to go with it. As you may know from other reviews, I don't like to go into them knowing things. I like to just go straight into the story and find out exactly for myself what's going on with them. And yeah, this was a very interesting story because it started off with the 4th Doctor and Romana just being themselves, which is what I loved. Honestly, I love the idea of seeing the Doctor and Romana together again after so long, actually, because personally, as I said, I've never listened to any 4th Doctors on Big Finish, so this is actually quite a big change for me, and it's just nice. I think there's sort of a different atmosphere. I think that even when I was reviewing Aquitaine the other day, I have seen a classic Doctor and their companions reunited after all this time on Big Finish. There's a nice little atmosphere there, and I really do like that Big Finish atmosphere of tone that Big Finish do set, because it is generally a really nice thing to listen to. So the opening of it actually reminded me a bit of Sharda, where they had that scene from the 5 Doctors that was added in from filming, and yeah, that was a very interesting idea. I think it was a rather nice sort of ease into the story. Got me intrigued straight away, actually, as we had the Doctor and Romana just generally talking, which was nice to see. I ended up going to a pub, and it was nice because we got introduced to a few characters there. But before we actually see this, we do get introduced to a part of the plot that becomes a lot more important later on in the story. As you can guess by the title of the episode, this is actually set in Budapest, and the main sort of focus of the story is Buda Castle, which I don't think we've had anything similar to that in Doctor Who before, so that's nice to have a new little setting in there. And it's set in the 80s, so it's actually quite a modern time, I guess, as I do believe when this episode would have been made, if it was in the 4th Doctor era, that would of course be the future. So it's actually quite interesting to see sort of like a present day style of story and acting, really, but in the future. It's sort of a weird thing that I like that Big Finish do, because it means that they can do all sorts that the initial TV series couldn't. So very early on in the episode, we are introduced to a character called Zoltan Frid. Now his character is actually a very interesting one, and as you can guess, he's actually the vampire character of the story, and he's the main villain. To play him being Mark Bonar, he is actually the 11 in Doom Coalition, which previously I have listened to Doom Coalition, and it is a pretty good box set. I do really like the opening episode, the 11. I think that he's a brilliant actor, so it's nice to actually see him in this. I didn't actually recognise it was him to start with. I think he has a very Richard E. Grant style of voice, actually, which I do find quite an intriguing voice, as it does sound very mysterious, and I think that his acting fit the character really well. But as I said, Romana is at a pub really early on in the story. The Doctor goes to find Cash in the TARDIS, and she's just waiting on in the pub. Romana actually meets the character of Zoltan Frid in the pub, and we have a bit of a conversation there, which once again is quite mysterious to open the story. Quite different to actually see the characters and the villains meet this early on without really knowing, so yeah, that was a nice little sort of development in the plot that I did really like. And then we had the Doctor just bounding into the pub with his very loud voice, which is what I love about Tom Baker, as I think that always his voice, no matter how old he gets, his voice always remains the same, and his acting always remains the same, which is something that I can say for pretty much all the classic Doctors. But Tom's in particular, his voice from the start has always been very intriguing, much like why he's sort of the narrator for quite a lot of things still today. Like, for example, he does Little Britain, or used to when Little Britain was around. He also, I do believe, does the Sky adverts on the radio, so I do tend to listen to that radio station just constantly, just to hear his voice pop up every so often, because he does tend to appear quite often. But yeah, it's nice to sort of see that they're still using his voice capabilities in this. And he's generally quite a comedic Doctor. I think that it doesn't fit the story at all, which is what I love. I think that he's very alien. I think that the problem with sometimes with the 5th Doctor is he does seem a little bit normal, which is something that I've seen in other episodes that I've listened to with the 5th Doctor, and for example, he just seems a little bit too normal. But with the 4th Doctor in the story, we have a very dark plot in there, which I think that adding this sort of comedic effect makes it very unhuman and very, very unnatural, which is what I like, because it really does break the suspense sometimes, which is also something that I can't just comment on with the 4th Doctor. Throughout this episode, several times there is actually a few comedic points there with the main characters of the story, including Mark Bonar playing the main villain as Frid, and there is actually a few little funny scenes in there with him using holy water and things, and basically one of the characters that we soon get introduced to throws holy water at the vampire, and it doesn't really do anything. He just says, right, I'm leaving now, and just walks out. I just love that comedic atmosphere, as once again, it doesn't really feel like 1970s Doctor Who, but it actually feels a little bit different, and it's very refreshing, and I do quite like that. Basically, there's this murder directly outside of the pub, and we are quickly introduced to the plot of the story, as well as one of the main characters of the story being Celia. Now, Celia is actually quite a nice character. Once again, I did actually find myself sort of quite liking her character quite early on, which is nice, with very little information about her. Basically, she's on the hunt for Dracula, which she mistakes the Doctor for being, which adds for a great comedic effect once again. And then we are very easily sort of drawn into her character. We learn quite a bit about her, and basically she becomes the Fourth Doctor's companion throughout the story. There is actually several opportunities for development of her character in this episode, because Romana actually goes off using this little address that they found in the murdered corpse's sort of pocket. She goes off to this house, and the Fourth Doctor and Celia go off to Buda Castle itself, which allows us some Doctor and sort of new companion time to sort of develop her character really early on in the story before they meet up towards the end of the first episode. Once again, I do really like this, as over just a little bit amount of time we do actually get to know quite a lot about her character, and I think that that's what works with Doctor Who. Is I think that once you take the companion out and add somebody else in, especially for just a little bit of time, you allow them to play the companion role for a while, and therefore knowing about their character, which I think she is a great character in the episode, and I think that she generally does hold it together quite well. She's quite a basic plot idea. I think that she works well with the plot. She's sort of like an expert in what she's talking about, I guess, and she is a vampire hunter, which for this episode, being alien vampires, I think that that works once again, a quite nice, intriguing idea. So Romana goes off to meet Anita, which is the person who is in the address of the murdered person's pocket, and there is actually an interesting scene there once again, as I do believe that Anita sort of becomes the companion of Romana in this scene, and basically because they are sort of scientist people in this university, they have the access to sort of equipment such as microscopes, so that's what she gets straight away. She gets the microscope out and uses a little sample of the murdered guy's blood, and what they soon find out is it's not normal blood, and it's actually been sort of contaminated or infected by the alien that at the time is following a very vampire style effect, so we assume a vampire at this point. And I think that that's a nice little idea. I think that blood as well, I think that's quite a gory plot fitting with the idea of the story itself, and I do like that. Actually, it makes for a very intriguing idea to start with before we actually get to the very premise of the plot in the earlier parts of part 2. Romana and Celia then actually go off for a little while, and then they bump into the vampire again in sort of like the grounds of the university, and she accidentally lets slip where Anita is, because he wants Anita because of the knowledge that she has. Which plot of the vampires in the story is not just a normal vampire plot, it's actually an idea of not getting the blood in order to get blood. It's actually the idea of knowledge, which I just love that idea, because there was actually a very interesting quote in the second part of the story. It's actually something on the lines of, why not take over the world when you can know it, which I love that. It's a very idea and knowledge-based story, which is a very interesting idea, as I think that towards the early parts of the story, it does look like a very stereotypical style of vampire idea, but I love that twist sort of halfway through. Earlier hints of this in sort of like the late parts of episode 1, but in the final episode of episode 2, we do actually get this full-on hints of the knowledge and things, and the idea. That's why Fred wants to get the blood from people, because from getting the blood he gets the knowledge, which I just love, and that's the idea of why he's killing all of these quite high-rank sort of intelligent people, like the scientists, things like that. And he has this quite early mindset as well, as he actually kills the male at the very start of the story, and he expects that that is the person who knows all this knowledge, but going in further depth after killing the person and finding out that he doesn't in fact have the knowledge, it's actually Anita that has the knowledge, because she is actually the scientist there. And once again, there is actually a rather interesting part of the story where he doesn't expect it to be the woman, just because of the class system and the way that how in this time women would normally be set down below men, sort of the different equalities between different people. And I think that that's a very interesting idea, as it sort of shows of where he came from and how times have changed again, which I do really like that idea. Then goes to track down Anita in order to gain this knowledge, and then Celia lets slip of where she actually is. The Fourth Doctor confronting Zoltan in sort of the workplace of Anita, and yet it is literally a kettle boiling moment, as throughout the background we do have the build-up of the kettle whistling, and then as we get to the very end of the story, the kettle goes, and then the cliffhanger goes, and then the theme goes at the very end. I just love that sort of fitting. It's very nice and very sort of satisfying, that end. And I think that once that leads into episode 2, once again, it is an interesting format. With it only being 1 hour long, it does have quite a lot to fit in there, but I think it does it very well. The time management for the story is very good. So moving on to part 2 now, we do have the conclusion of the cliffhanger where he actually kidnaps Anita, and basically he wants her for his queen, I guess, for the sort of overruling of the world and things like that, and the knowledge and things, because once you infect one person, they then go on like a vampire would and change into a vampire to then go and infect somebody else like that, and knowing all the knowledge and things, which I think that once again it's a very nice and ruling idea, the idea of power, which is great. And there's this very nice scene as well, sort of early parts of part 2, where the Doctor, Romana and Celia go off to Buda Castle to return to the Labyrinth of Buda Castles for the final act of the story, which I do like. A very nice setting, as it's very sort of, once again, quite gothic horror style, very dark, and we basically have the flooding of the tunnels and things. I do really like that idea. Once again, it is a very dark and gothic horror effect. Something for the final part of the story that I actually don't really want to talk about, because I feel that I want the viewers to have the same shock as this as I did when listening to it, and it is something that I referenced in my Only the Monstrous review the other day, and yeah, it is a very interesting twist that literally got me very shocked, and actually shows the difference between the new series and Big Finish, and it shows how Big Finish can actually dare to do things, because the new series is way too safe. And I think that once again, this idea of what the plot and the Big Finish idea has, I think it just throws a whole new different dynamic in there, and the very conclusion to this story, and maybe the certain fate of one of the characters in the episode, is very interesting. And once again, it does shock me quite a lot, and it does actually trick me into believing how not everybody is safe, which is what I love with Big Finish, because I think that with the new series, once again, all of the characters are too safe. Clara isn't going to die unless we know she is. You know, it's just way too safe, and I think that we have this way too powerful character thing, and the danger is sort of took away. But with Big Finish, on the other hand, literally anybody can die, and I just love that. So that's that overall for this episode. I do recommend it, actually. As I said at the very start of the review, I've not listened to any of the Fourth Doctor on Big Finish before, so this is definitely a starting point as I understood it. And I don't believe, as far as I know, there isn't really any linking things with other stories, and I think that generally the understanding is quite clear there. And I think that once again, you can just hop on at any point with this, which is great, and a great opportunity for other people to get into Big Finish as well. So I'd highly recommend this story. I think that generally as well, all the voice artists for this episode were generally brilliant. I think that all of them did a brilliant job in this story. I had Layla Waters, Romana, obviously. We also had Tom Baker, obviously being the Fourth Doctor, of course. And then generally also the supporting cast as well, which I think is honestly a rarity for Big Finish. It is brilliant the supporting cast are. I do generally think that in this episode it was very strong, and I can't honestly say that there was one that I generally found less engaged in. I think that generally the main sub-little characters worked very well in the story and had a part to play in the plot, which is once again a rarity that I have with the new series. Celia and Anita were brilliant parts of the story as well. I love their little contributions to the plot. They did generally feel like real people, which is great. Finally, we have Zoltan Frid. Now, he was obviously, of course, the main vampire for this episode that I've no doubt have mispronounced several times throughout this review because I'm terrible with his name. But as I said, he was played by Mark Bonat. Now, I would highly recommend seeing any of the work that he's done on Big Finish. Maybe even this episode, the Buda Castle one, or even Doom Coalition. I know that Doom Coalition 1 came out a while ago. I listened to that and I loved him in that. So I'd highly recommend going and checking that out, especially the 11. I love that story. And then we also have Doom Coalition 2 coming out soon, which no doubt will have the 11 in as well. So I'd highly recommend checking out some of his work because he is a very talented person. As the format is a little bit different for this story, it's about 1 hour long and the episode is generally split into 2 parts, which I do like. I think that with the problem with the monthly range is generally sometimes it can be a little bit too long. I think that your attention could sort of float away sometimes, but with this it works very well because it is quite a nice little confined plot. It works very nicely and you can just sit down on one evening, press play, and then get it done with within an hour and understand the plot fully, which I think that is the difference between having a short story that can be fully understood or having the slightly longer ones that maybe could be a little bit complicated in places and lead you to sort of get a bit distracted. And I think that's what works well with this episode. It's a nice confined plot, and I've actually listened to it twice now, which showed that I did actually really do like the story. As always, in the description below I will leave down the link so you can go and buy this episode if you'd like it. I believe it's about £10.99, which personally for one Fourth Doctor story I think that that's brilliant. As I said, it's a great release, so for £10.99 you can't really go wrong, so I'll leave the link below if you'd like to buy it. Then also to the other Big Finish website as well. I guarantee you if you go on there you won't regret it because there's tons of stuff that's just brilliant. High quality 10 out of 10 episodes all around, and especially the spin-offs as well, and the things to come look great. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please do give it a big like and please subscribe if you're not already. If you have any questions, please do leave them below and I'll be sure to answer them at some point in the near future. Thanks again for watching. I shall see you all next time. So thanks for watching and bye for now.